this, we come to our panel on WIIS chairwomen. Let me first introduce to you Dr. Chantal de Jong-Outraat. Now, that does not only sound Dutch, but it is Dutch. Chantal is an internationally known peace expert, having worked, among others, at the U.S. Institute for Peace, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and the UN Institute Disarmament Research. But equally important, she has been our president of WIIS Global since 2013. Welcome, Chantal, on the stage. Take this one. The next chairwoman is Dr. Corinna Hurst. That not only sounds German, but it is German. Corinna is the deputy director of the German Marshall Fund in Brussels. Corinna has also frequently written on EU and transatlantic issues, and just last year published a book, which we can highly recommend, needless to say, and with a co-author, Women Leading the Way in Brussels. And Corinna is the chairwoman of WIIS in Brussels, which comprises Belgium and the EU. Welcome, Corinna. And I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Beata Gorka-Winter, because she is from Poland, and Poland is one of the youngest WIIS affiliates that we have founded in February of this year. Beata is an expert on international security defense and an adjunct professor at the Center for Europe at the University of Warsaw. She worked as an advisor to the CEE region, Afghanistan, and the Southern Caucasus. So she's welcome, the chairwoman of WIIS Poland, Beata. I would also like to mention that we have other chairwomen of WIIS chapters here, for example, Jessica Grun, who is the president of WIIS Austria. Ulrike Franke is a member of the board from the UK, and will be on the panel of artificial intelligence in warfare later, and I apologize if I forgot somebody. So originally we were planned to have 40 minutes, but as we know that there's one thing you should absolutely keep at conferences, that's the coffee break. So therefore, we will cut our discussion a little bit short, but we will want to cover a couple of topics: NATO and the EU relationship, the transatlantic relationship, and needless to say, the UN Resolution 1325. We wanted actually to open it for discussion as well, but we will see how much time we will have left. In the last 10 minutes, we're happy that Chantal will give us her outlook on WIIS Global and what we will do in the future and where she wants to lead this conference, this organization too. I would like to start actually with NATO, and because that, needless to say, is one of our topics that we all work a little bit on. So we have seen a shift of interest in the US, from the US to China, to the South China Sea, to Russia, has strong interests in Asia, etc. So is NATO missing the boat, so to speak? Are we losing importance? And have we, in the end, so to speak, just the opportunity as Europeans to shut up and pay? And Chantal, speaking of shut up and pay in the United States, is there, since you have now a democratic house, is there an enormous shift expected in foreign policy in the US? The microphone is next to you.
So very briefly, I don't think there's going to be a shift in foreign policy in the US because of the Democratic House. It does change the, the environment of the United States, and I think it also opens up new opportunities for engagement. As Julie has said before, there are a lot of people in the US who are in favor of supporting the alliance. That's both at state and local levels, but civil society, I think, in general. And so I wouldn't, I think NATO will just hum along. We've had these squabbles in the past, and I would say sort of sit tight and engage with these other audiences in the US.
Corinna you have one on next to you as well. We're all equipped.
I mean, so I work in Brussels. Obviously, we engage a lot with NATO. I actually don't think there's, you know, a lack of interest. It's very much engaged. NATO has to figure out how it wants to work with the EU, and it's the silver lining of President Trump. But finally, European countries are also waking up to, you know, what do they need to do in terms of defense budgets, and how to tackle security in a much broader way than just with tanks and boots on the ground. So the debate is going. I wouldn't sort of see the shift on Asia too big.
Beata, we have heard strong words of defense for NATO from the Polish government. So give us your Polish view on NATO and what you think is that a specific relationship with NATO and Poland?
Okay, NATO in Poland in general. Where, from our perspective, there are several issues to point out. The first one, yes, of course, Poland and Polish government is very much worrying about the general problems which NATO, but not only NATO, but also the EU are facing. First of all, this deepening transatlantic gap consider not only burden sharing, as President Trump is underlining almost every day on Twitter, but that's kind of subjective assessment. But there are also objective issues which are to be worried about. And today, it was already mentioned several times, disruptive technologies and generally deepening gap between US and Europe, but also between US, Europe, and China, and India, and even Russia. These three countries, of course, China is a leader with India, Russia's following. They are investing enormous sums of money in cutting-edge technologies. That's what we don't see, especially in Europe. Maybe in US, in Canada, a bit in France, but not the rest of Europe. So this is what is worrying us in Poland, that in an objective terms, we will not be able to face the risk and threats coming from this side. Well, there are also things to be happy about, and of course, we very much appreciate that the alliance is finally, after so many years of Polish advocating, to have more troops, more infrastructure, more saturation of NATO forces on the eastern flank. Finally, this project is materializing, and we welcome very much more NATO engagement, more NATO drills, military equipment, soldiers from different NATO countries on our soil. So that's what we seriously appreciate.
So that means we have one country at least who is fully committed to the 2%.
Sure.
Exactly. On the transatlantic relationship, Chantal, we have had rough times in our transatlantic relationship before. For example, during the Iraq creek, but we had the feeling that was more on issues rather than on, so to speak, emotion, etc. So now we see many topics, and this began already a little bit in the pre-Trump area with the shift of the Obama administration to Asia. But will you see a continuous shift, is, so to speak, as Julie already mentioned as well, will there be any hope for the transatlantic relationship, or can we say goodbye Europe?
No, I'm very lucky that Julie was here before me. She said it all, I think. The transatlantic relationship and NATO relationship is very closely, tied together. And I would say to the Europeans, you know, stop focusing so much on Trump and instead use this maybe crisis in the transatlantic relationship to develop capabilities in the European arena, both on the foreign policy side as well as the defense side. We've seen this in 2003. There was a push for more European cooperation, and I would argue, you know, maybe Europeans should do that currently as well, and forget a little bit about Trump and not focus too much on that.
Corinna, how is the transatlantic relationship seen in Brussels?
No, I can only second what Julia said and Chantal, that Trump is only one American voice in this sort of larger transatlantic debate. And there was a fantastic example this summer. So at the NATO summit, there was a side conference going on where WIIS Brussels, together with the German Marshall Fund Atlantic Council, as well as the Munich Security Conference, was sort of doing a side conference, and so people were moving in and out. And there was a bipartisan congressional delegation who, at the same time, when President Trump was making, sort of, you know, rattling the forces at NATO headquarters, were reconfirming their commitment to the transatlantic relationship. So
we have 1 minute left, basically, and we want to chat before we give it to Chantal, because we don't want to cut off her 10 minutes. So the last topic, Beata, a short answer, please, on the UN Resolution 1325, because all our countries have given themselves action plans. And that is actually something where we as WIIS members can have an active part in helping to monitor these action plans. So how are you pleased with the action plan of the Polish government that has just been released, I think, last week or this week? So give us a short answer, please.
Yeah, thank you, Ramgar, for this question. Actually, Poland is a newcomer to the club of around 80 countries which already adopted the national action plans. There was a role of WIIS Poland because our plan was prepared in cooperation of one side MOD, MFA, Ministry of Interior, and one other institution, and it was open to public consultations, and as WIIS Poland, we were asked to participate in this consultation, so we just prepared our remarks, and I'm happy, you know, to announce that they were admitted even, so which is not so obvious sometimes with the public consultation process. So you can read our national action plans on our websites, MOD or MFA websites, but I really strongly recommend to reading it because it's a bit different than other documents. I mean, there are some regular parts, as in every document, but also there is a strong underlining of the role of women, not only in a current context, like participation in mission, in operation abroad, but also what was the role of Polish women, First World War, second, it started much earlier than NATO and EU missions. So that's why I'm strongly recommended to read this document.
Thank you. We will do so and compare notes on the German second action plan and on the Polish first action plan and on the US action plan. And this was the shortest round we have ever done. Go ahead.
Chantal, I hope you give me 1 minute of your 10 minutes.
Yeah.
No, because I want to add something to this, because I think that Women, Peace and Security, the sort of gender action plan, is an opportunity, and it was an awareness raising, but I think we need to move beyond this now. And it piggybacks on something that the State Secretary was saying. I think we need to now look at diversity and inclusion as a next step, because we, and I'm sort of including the West, we've been pushing so much about, you know, having women on negotiating tables, sort of transition governments as well as the mediators, but we haven't held ourselves accountable. And so most of the time, NATO teams, European teams were all men. And so it goes back to we need to look at our own institution and structures and change that. And it's actually the Ministry of Defense in Germany will actually host a sort of international conference on diversity and inclusion next June here in Berlin. And I think this is sort of where WIIS in all of our chapters can actually make a tremendous impact.
Yes, and this is why I so kindly said to the State Secretary, we will help you monitor that action plan. Okay, on this happy note, thank you very much. Chantal, the floor is yours. I will move over there, and we are very interested in hearing your comments on where you want to take WIIS in the next 15, 20, 30 years.
Thank you very much, Armgard. First, I want to really congratulate you and the whole team, as well as all the other leaders of the WIIS chapters here in Germany, for organizing this conference. And I would be remiss not to mention, you've mentioned them already, the previous chairwomen of WIIS Deutschland, Maybrit Stumbaum, Constance Stelzemüller, of course Silke Tempel, and now you, Armgard. But I would also be remiss if I didn't mention Catherine Kelleher, who founded WIIS 30 years ago and has always had very strong relationships with Germany, and Gail Mattox, president of WIIS from 1996 to 2003, and who was also very instrumental in the creation of WIIS Deutschland. Now, I would say in the last 15 years, the WIIS network has become a truly global network. The network has also become more institutionalized and professional. Even though the bulk of the work of both WIIS Global and the international affiliates is mostly done by volunteers, most affiliates have become their own legal entities and are strongly anchored within their environments. They correspond to deeply felt needs and engage many women, young and old. In the US and elsewhere, WIIS has been important in the professional development and careers of many young women. And Julie, again, you talked about that very eloquently. But I think our efforts are still very much needed. And we see this in the record number of young women signing up for membership and eager for mentoring and networking opportunities. Therefore, our initial mission of promoting the role of women in foreign and defense affairs and advancing their professional development in the international peace and security sphere remains essential. Conferences like these, policy panels that showcase the expertise of women in the field, skills building programs, the provision of networking and mentoring opportunities remain essential. Yet, I also believe that in the world of today, this is not enough. We also need to be more actively engaged on the policy debates that will define the future. We need to redouble our efforts in shaping these debates, and we need to step up and support research efforts where we can. It has been said before, despite the progress we have made these past 30, 15 years in terms of gender equality, fact is that progress has been limited and uneven. The underrepresentation of women in national and international security deliberations remain glaring. The security establishments remain predominantly composed of men and run by men. In the United States, women constitute about 40% of the Foreign Service Officer Corps, but they hold only 1/3 of the chief mission positions. Women make up 33% of the Department of Defense civilian staff and 18% of the DoD active duty officer corps, and at the highest ranks, that of general or flag officer, they barely reach 8%. Women also remain underrepresented as expert commentators in the media. In the US, women accounted for just 24% of foreign affairs and national security experts invited to speak at major talk shows. Panels, that is event panels composed of only men, remain common in the US. Now, this summer we did a survey of Washington, D.C. think tanks. Think tanks play an important role in shaping foreign and defense policy agendas. The leadership of these think tanks have all proclaimed their support of gender equality and advancing the role of women in their institutions. Yet, looking at the data, only 3 out of 22 think tanks surveyed, that is 14%, have achieved gender parity within their expert staff. On average, only 27% of expert staff in DC think tanks are women. This number drops to 22% when we look at the governing boards of these institutions. If we go beyond the numbers and look at programming, there's only one institution that considers gender an important part of its programming. Gender and gender perspectives as a lens to examine international and national security challenges is absent from the work of DC think tanks, and I'm afraid that the US is not an exception. For many in the traditional security think tank community, and more generally the security establishments, gender is ill understood and often equated with women or a women's point of view. A 2016 survey of New America found that the majority of US policymakers and elites had little knowledge and understanding of gender. If at all open to the idea of a gender perspective, the majority believed that an add women and stir approach would be sufficient. Importantly, most policymakers in the survey believed that a gendered perspective is relevant for only a handful of topics like sexual slavery, sexual violence, sex trafficking. They did not believe that gender was relevant for national security issues. Now, this lack of understanding of gender as a multi-level social construct that governs relations between men and women within societal structures and institutions, this lack of understanding how gender structures power in every arena and at every level is widespread in Washington, D.C., and again, I do not believe that Washington, D.C. is an exception. The reality is that most security establishments continue to look at national and international security challenges in traditional ways. They focus on traditional security threats that are analyzed through traditional lenses and traditional policy frameworks. Policymakers on both sides of the Atlantic make grand declarations in favor of gender equality, the importance of gender balancing, and gender perspectives. Yet these declarations have not or are insufficiently integrated in practice. The continuing predominantly male-dominated security environment and the lack of understanding of gender are two important reasons why the gender equality and the women, peace, and security agendas have stalled. And in this regard, it is noteworthy that among the projects selected to be presented at the Paris Peace Forum earlier this week, none was devoted to the women, peace, and security agenda. And only a handful of the 110 projects presented had a serious gender component, and then it was a component that really focused on the grassroots and the local level. I believe that WIIS has very serious responsibilities in this regard. Our network is unique. Many of our members are in the policy world, they're active in security establishments, and engaged in the think tank and academic world. I think we should take advantage of this. We have a comparative advantage that we should use. I sincerely believe that gender equality, that is gender balance at the level of representation and better understanding of gender dynamics when examining international security challenges is key to better and more effective policies, is key to sustainable peace. If we want to change things, and I think we want to, we need to incorporate a gender analysis in our work. We need to examine the power structures of policy-making institutions that keep women out of the halls of power, decision-making structures, and security institutions. And Corinna was mentioning this. Once we do that, we also become, I think, a more inclusive in our approaches. A gender analysis enhances our understanding of traditional security issues, such as armed conflict and terrorism, as well as non-traditional, non-military human security challenges, such as migration, climate change, or IT and cybersecurity. A gender analysis allows us to better understand who is impacted by global security challenges. It allows us to recognize how the categories of men and women are defined in relation to each other and through the intersections with other important social differences, such as class, ethnicity, etc. And how together gender and these intersectional forms of identity shape vulnerabilities and risks for specific people. It will allow us to develop better remedial and preventive policies. Lastly, a focus on gender in our analysis of national and international security challenges places power at the center of analysis. This should make it harder, I think, for the traditional security community to brush off gender as a women's issue. This should also encourage us to engage and involve men in our work and activities. And Armgard mentioned that in her introductory remarks. It is my hope that we push this agenda not only in each of our national spheres and our national environments, but also collectively. Indeed, for the future, it is my hope that we engage on the issues related to gender and the Women, Peace and Security agenda, not individually, but as a collective. And I would very much like to convene all of our 22 international affiliates for a collective reflection on these issues. This reflection could result in a conference and a series of publications, and we will soon send out a call to all WIIS members and WIIS affiliates to be part of this initiative and to make this initiative a reality. We have enormous talent and expertise within our global work, and I think this conference is an illustration of that. I hence close with an appeal to all of you to broaden our agenda from one that goes beyond gender balancing. WIIS 2.0 is that and much more. It is the fight for true gender equality. And I close with the conviction that together, I think we can make the world a better place. Thank you, and hurrah to WIIS Deutschland, hurrah to all the WIIS members, and hurrah to our global network.
Thank you very much, Chantal, for this fiery speech on women's and gender issues. Ladies and gentlemen, the coffee break.